In 1964, in Soviet Tashkent, the Academy of Sciences printed a book. The book itself was much older. It was written in Bukhara in the 1870s by a scholar named Ahmad Donish, and buried inside it on page 197 is a story that should not exist. It's the confession of a merchant, a man so wealthy that, in the storyteller's words, even the kings of India could not match his household. For years he refused to say where the money came from, not inheritance, not trade. When a friend finally pressed him, he gave a warning instead of an answer. A long story has passed over my head, one that would make hearts tremble. Whoever hears it will not believe it. Then he told it anyway. And here is the problem. The story he told, a story written down by a landlocked scholar 1,000 miles from any ocean, describes real places, real physics, and real phenomena at the bottom of the world. Places no one from Bukhara had ever seen. Some of them, places no human had seen at all. Stay with me, because the deeper we check this story, the stranger it gets. First, how does a sea story reach Bukhara? Bukhara is about as far from the ocean as it is possible to be, a city of madrasas and caravan trade in the heart of Central Asia. Ahmad Donish never claimed he witnessed any of it. He recorded a chain. A brother returning from the Hajj pilgrimage told him what a merchant in India had told him. 3 narrators deep, which is exactly how impossible stories actually traveled in the 19th century, along pilgrimage roads and trade routes, from mouth to mouth, until they reached a man with a pen. So this is either a true account, distorted by distance, or a perfect lie. Our job tonight is to find out which. Donish, as it happens, was the right man to receive it and the wrong man to fool. Remember that. It matters later. The merchant's life, as recorded, a fortune beyond counting, hundreds of servants, palaces, banquets, and a hole in the middle of it, no visible source. His confession begins conventionally enough. A young man leaves Khorasan, eastern Persia, to make his fortune. He goes to Paris. He spends 2 years learning French, German, bookkeeping, because, he says, in Europe a man who doesn't speak the language cannot do business. Then London, and here the manuscript does something unexpected. It stops the story for statistics. The merchant describes London like a man hypnotized by numbers. Listen to these, all from the manuscript. A death every 8 minutes, a birth every 5, 300,000 emigrants to America every year, and still the city grows. 1 baker for every 1,206 people, 1 butcher for every 1,553, 30,000 pickpockets and thieves, 10,000 registered taverns. So, let's audit him. This is the 1860s to 70s. London holds roughly 3 million people, the largest city on Earth. A death every 8 minutes works out to about 65,000 deaths a year. Actual Victorian London, in that range, plausible. A birth every 5 minutes, about 105,000 a year, also in range, plausible. The baker and butcher ratios, oddly specific, which is the tell. These aren't a fantasist's numbers. These are the kind of figures printed in Victorian almanacs and city statistics, the sort of thing a trade-minded visitor would copy into a notebook. Then, mid-passage, Donish himself interrupts. The scholar breaks in with his own senses of the world, and here he stumbles. He gives a world population of 90 billion, off by a factor of 60, a number he could only have mangled from second-hand sources. And honestly, that error is the most reassuring thing in the manuscript. It tells us Donish records what he's told faithfully, even when he can't verify it. He is not polishing, he is not inventing, he is an honest channel for whatever reached him. Keep that in mind, because what reached him next is the part nobody believes. From London, the merchant joins a trading consortium bound for Calcutta, and the manuscript notes something precise. Their fleet used both kinds of ship, fire-driven and wind-driven, switching between steam and sail as conditions demanded. That detail dates the voyage perfectly. The 1850s to 1870s, the only era in history when serious merchant fleets ran steam and sail side by side. A fantasist wouldn't know to include that. A sailor would. The route, London to Calcutta, northwest to southeast. The manuscript says roughly 90 degrees across the sea, 18 months with stops. The long way, around the Cape. Somewhere south, the navigator, a blind European, reading the sea by sound and by tasting mud hauled from the bottom on a lead line, which, by the way, is a real technique from the age of sail, makes a call, fair winds, rest the engines, raise canvas. 2 days later, the ship stops answering. The bow is hauled south no matter where they point it. A steamship, a machine the manuscript says could climb mountain-sized waves, cannot break the grip. They cast 500 gaz of rope, no bottom, and the navigator breaks. He tears his hair. He tells them what the charts say, that far south, near the pole, there is a whirlpool that pulls ships from a month's journey away. Beside it, a mountain like a tower, the whirlpool of Alexander. No one has gone there and returned, except the legend says Alexander the Great. Stop. This is where we check the map, because the manuscript does something no legend needs to do. It gives coordinates, 50 degrees south, and later at the graveyard of ships, the survivors shoot the stars and measure their position, over 60 degrees. Put those lines on a real map. 50 south. Sailors called these waters the Furious 50s, the band where wind circles the planet with no land to stop it. 60 south. Today, that's the legal boundary of the Antarctic Treaty, the entry to the Southern Ocean. Between them runs the Drake Passage, statistically the most violent water on Earth. So the manuscript describes a disabled ship at 50 south being dragged helplessly deeper, 50 to 60, precisely along the corridor of the strongest current on the planet, the Antarctic circumpolar. The drift is not just plausible, it is correct. And that line the navigator says, that no one had ever been there, also correct. Captain Cook became the first human being on record to cross 60 degrees south in 1773, barely a century before Donish wrote this down. When this story was set, that latitude genuinely was the edge of the world. As for a whirlpool on the charts, that isn't an invention either. This is Gerardus Mercator, the most famous mapmaker who ever lived. On his polar map, respected across Europe, a giant vortex at the pole where the ocean drains into the earth, he drew the North Pole. The manuscript's navigator points south, but the belief that the sea keeps a mouth at the ends of the earth recorded in books of charts, that was real European cartography. A Bukharan text that knows the Furious 50s, the drift corridor, the age of steam and sail, the lead line, and Renaissance chart law. We're not done, it gets worse. 10 days in the current's grip, then they see it, a churning basin 3.5 miles across, swallowing everything that touches its mouth. Their ship survives for one reason, size. Too big to swallow, it circles the rim, in the manuscript's image, like a pair of compasses. The smaller boats lashed alongside are torn away, one by one, and vanish down the throat, along with the men who stayed aboard them to guard their cargo. 3 days on the rim, then a storm they mistake for death spits the ship free, hurls it like, the text says, spit from a mouth to the foot of the mountain. What they find there is a museum of everyone who came before, ships piled at the mountain's base, some rotted to skeletons, crews long since dust, their cargo still stacked where dead hands left it. Gold, silver, pearls, wealth beyond counting, guarded by no one. And in one newer wreck, a survivor, barely alive, they feed him drop by drop until he can speak. His ship out of India, 21 men. He watched every one of them die. When they calculate how long he has been trapped alone at the bottom of the world, the answer is 7 years. They ask him if there's a way out. His answer, this whirlpool is the mouth of a grave. Who escapes a grave? One detail here, easy to miss. The crew fixes their position by tracking and counting the stars. Simple line. Except in the southern hemisphere, that's not simple at all. There is no South Pole star. Nothing marks the point the sky turns around. The only way to find true south by night is the method in these diagrams. Extend the long axis of the Southern Cross, cross-check against the Centaurus pointers, and calculate an empty point in the dark. Real southern navigation, implied casually by a manuscript from a city where the Southern Cross never rises above the horizon. Then the survivor tells them the last thing. Once a year, he says, when the sun stands at the far southern point of its journey, something comes. The sea rises like mountains ahead of it. The wrecks at the mountain's base grind against each other in its bow wave. And then the impossible part. The whirlpool, 3.5 miles of rotating violence, goes quiet because the thing that arrives is big enough to enter it and cap it like a lid on a boiling cauldron. The manuscript is explicit. When the creature settles into the vortex, the roaring stops. It rests there, breathing, each breath raising and lowering the sea by the height of a spear for 3 days. Let's be honest about scale, because I won't insult this story by shrinking it. The largest animal that has ever lived is the blue whale, 30 meters. A living lid for a 3-mile whirlpool is not a whale. It is not anything. It is orders of magnitude beyond biology as we know it. The manuscript describes an impossibility, and yet the schedule isn't impossible at all. The sun at its farthest southern point, that is the December solstice, midsummer in the Southern Ocean, which happens to be exactly when the great migrations arrive in those waters. Every year on the sun's calendar, as punctual as the solstice itself. The creature is beyond nature. Its timetable is straight out of it. Make of that what you will. I genuinely cannot explain it. The navigator can't explain it either, but he can use it. He orders every scrap of iron salvaged from the dead fleet, chains forged, 300 to 500 gauge long, barbed spikes fitted to the links. For weeks, the ship becomes a blacksmith shop at the end of the world, and the crew doesn't even understand the plan until he tells them. When the thing comes to rest, we row out and we nail ourselves to it. They drive meter-long spikes into it with sledgehammers. It does not react. To something that size, the manuscript implies they are not even insects. 3 days later, the creature stirs, lifts out of the vortex, and heads for open sea, towing a merchant ship behind it like a fired arrow. 3 days lashed to a moving mountain. Sometimes it dives, and the sea around them goes calm and green. Sometimes it runs the surface, and the world is all spray and thunder. Then, birds, peaks ahead. The navigator screams the order, release the chains. They can't. Terror has them frozen to the masts. The creature veers. The ship hits the mountain at full tow speed and disintegrates. The merchant comes to in the surf, clinging to a boat, 2 companions alive. Everyone else gone with the creature, dragged away on the chains into the dark. And the mountain they've wrecked on, no plants, no soil. The ground itself is hidden under rubies, sapphires, emeralds, diamonds, lying thick as wildflowers, filling the ravines where floodwater runs. The merchant was a jeweler by first trade. He knows exactly what he is looking at. He gathers 130 kilograms of the finest stones, single gems, he says, worth 50,000 gold pieces each.
The ship hits the mountain and shatters. But remember what the manuscript said about the whirlpool. The smaller boats lashed alongside the main hull were smashed to pieces and swallowed. Not all of them. 3 men clung to the ship's own auxiliary boats as it broke apart. Those boats, lighter than the hull, unmoored from the chains, survive the impact. The survivors drag them ashore. They load them with 130 kilograms of stones, and they push off north. Island to island, 15 days, working up through open ocean in a lifeboat loaded with rubies. Step ashore west of Calcutta. He sells a fraction of the stones for 60,000 rupees, buys the palace, the servants, the life that made kings jealous. The rest of the gems, he tells his friend, remain exactly where he hid them. And that, says the manuscript, is the true capital behind the fortune no one could explain. So, what is this? A miracle tale dressed in Sinbad's clothes? Partly, the ship graveyard, the Leviathan, the treasure island are ancient story bones, and Donish, a scholar, knew his classics. But then explain the rest. Explain the furious 50s, the drift from 50 to 60 south along the strongest current on Earth, the steam and sail fleet, the lead line, the southern stars, the solstice timetable, the charts that really did show a polar vortex. Explain why every checkable detail in a landlocked scholar's sea story checks out. Here's what we know about the author. Ahmad Donish was no cloistered mystic. He travelled with Bukharan embassies to St. Petersburg. He saw the modern world, its cities, its science, and came home arguing his emirate must wake up to it. He was, by every account, the most rigorous mind Bukhara produced in his century. Exactly the kind of man who writes down a returning pilgrim's story and quietly preserves the numbers, the latitudes, the details a lesser writer would have lost. And here's the part that unsettles me. The story tells you exactly where its own knowledge comes from. Every real detail, the 50-degree latitude, the drift, the lead line, the stars, the timing of the sun, is put in the mouth of one man, the blind European navigator, quoting, in the text's own words, the books of maritime charts. The tale is honest about its source. This is European sea science, carried by a European sailor, written down in Persian. So the mystery was never who in the story knew. The story says, the navigator knew. The mystery is the one sitting on top of it, the real one. How did that knowledge travel this far, this intact? Trace the chain the manuscript actually gives us. A merchant tells his life to a Bukharan pilgrim met on the road home from the Hajj. The pilgrim carries it to Bukhara. Donish writes it down. 3 tellings in 3 languages across half the world, and the furious 50s survive the journey. The latitudes survive. The chart law survives, correctly labelled as European. Detail that should have blurred into legend at every retelling didn't. The manuscript doesn't say, it just keeps its secret. Page 197, printed in Tashkent, 1964, waiting for someone to check its math. We just did. And the math is the most frightening part. This channel opens forgotten manuscripts from the East and audits them against real geography, history, and science. If you want to know what other impossible things the old books knew, subscribe. The next manuscript is already open on my desk.